Amen. You can have a seat when you are ready. Well, y'all sound excited this morning. Are you excited to be in God's house? Amen. I am too. Turn in your Bibles with me to 2 Samuel chapter 1. We're going to pick up there. We ended up 1 Samuel finding out that Saul had led his men into a battle, and in that battle, Saul himself had died. He had actually committed suicide. He had been wounded, and he was standing there with his armor bearer, and he asked his armor bearer to go ahead and finish him off. And he said, no, he said, can't do that. You know, just like David, he said, I cannot kill one of God's anointed. So that armor bearer took his own life. Saul took his life. He fell upon his own sword, and the armor bearer witnessed this, and the armor bearer said before he died himself that the king was dead, that Saul had passed. We pick up in the first chapter of 2 Samuel, and let me share this with you. In the original writings, these were not two books, because as you read through 1 and 2 Samuel, you'll see the story just continues on. But at some point, they divided it up into two books, but in the original writings, it was one complete book. But that's just, some trivia for you if you ever get asked that question. Let's look at verse 1 of 2 Samuel chapter 1. Now it came to pass after the death of Saul, when David had returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, and David had stayed 2 days in Ziklag. Remember, that's where David and all of his men, they set up a place for them to live. That was a home to them at that point. On the third day, behold, it happened that a man came from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and dust on his head. Now, what is that symbolic of when they've got dust on their head and they've got their torn clothes? What is that symbolic of? Talk back to me. Oh, I told Pastor Terry I was going to steal that sometime. That was a symbol of their mourning. It's much like we wear black when there's a funeral, and we go to a funeral today. It's a symbol of mourning. And so here was this gentleman. He came in, he had on dust on his head, he had clothes torn. It says, so it was when he came to David that he fell on the ground and prostrated himself. David said to him, where have you come from? So he said to him, I have escaped from the camp of Israel. Now, folks, isn't that amazing? Here's a gentleman that has escaped the camp of Israel, meaning he was probably a prisoner of war, and there he was in that camp. He's escaped from that place of being there in Saul's camp and the camp of Israel. But now he's running to David. But we have to remember, David is also an Israelite. And so David himself, it's like he was running from one camp of the Israelites to another. And you'll see how that plays out shortly. So verse 3, where have you came from? He said, I've escaped from the camp of Israel. Then David said to him, how did the matter go? So David is interested. He wants to know how the battle went. He said, please tell me. And he answered, the people have fled from the battle. Many of the people are fallen and dead. And Saul and Jonathan, his son, are dead also. Now, we need to think about this for a minute. Here's this gentleman. In a moment, he's going to tell us that he's an Amalekite. He's going to share with David. He's already shared with him. He said, I've escaped from there, and what I found was that the Israelites, many of them have fled, and also in the midst of that, Saul and Jonathan, they have both been killed. Now, we know that Saul has pursued David. He's been after him for a long time. David, along with the men that have attached themselves to David, they have had to run, they've had to hide, they've had to keep away from Saul. And twice, David had the opportunity himself to kill Saul, but he said, no, I cannot take the life of one of God's appointed. So we know that about Saul and David's relationship, but then we also see the relationship between David and Jonathan because they were best friends. Jonathan had really protected David back in those early days, and he had watched out. He went to bat for David over and over and over for David to his dad, Saul. And so now he's finding out that both Saul and Jonathan are dead. The other two siblings, they have died as well, but he mentions those two, Saul and Jonathan. So David said to the young man who told him, "How do you know that Saul and Jonathan, his son, are dead?" The young man who told him said, and I can almost hear him saying this with some pride, "As I happened to by chance to be," in verse 6, "as I happened to by chance to be on Mount Gilboa, there was Saul leaning on his spear. And indeed the chariots and the horsemen followed hard after him. Now when he looked behind him, he saw me, and he called to me. And I answered and said, 'Here I am.' He said to me, 'Who are you?' So I answered him, 'I am an Amalekite.' He said to me, 'Who are you?' I am an Amalekite." In verse 9, he said to me again, "Please stand over me and kill me, for anguish has come upon me, but my life still remains in me." So I stood over him and killed him because I was sure that he could not live after he had fallen. I took the crown that was on his head and the bracelet that was on his arm, and I have brought them here to my Lord. Now let me ask you this question. When we finished up 1 Samuel, that last chapter there, we have learned there that Saul took his own life. Remember it said that, and I just told you a few moments ago, that Saul was mortally wounded, and he asked his armor bearer, he said, "Will you kill me?" His armor bearer said, "No, I can't do that." And so Saul leaned upon his own sword, killed himself, and we have record of the armor bearer saying that he saw him dying. So then we pick up in chapter 1 of 2 Samuel, and it seems like there's a contradiction. Because here we have this Amalekite man saying, "Hey, I was there, I was looking down, I saw that Saul was there, and he was leaning upon his sword, but he was still alive, and so he cried out to me to come help him." And he said, "So I killed him." And he said, "And after I killed him, I took his crown and I took his bracelet." I believe this Amalekite's lying. I believe he was there on the mountain. I believe he looked down and he saw that Saul was there and that he was dead, and he saw an opportunity for himself. If you study out the relationship between the Israelites and the Amalekites, you'll find out that they were enemies the entire span of time. And then you'll see here that this guy is trying to take care of himself. He's looking for an opportunity. How can I better myself? How can I make a better way for myself? And he had probably heard about David running from Saul. Saul was in pursuit of him, and he probably knew that David was going to be the next king, and so he thought, wow, here's a great opportunity. Because let me ask you this question. If you had just escaped from prison yourself, you've been a prisoner of war, you've escaped that, where would you want to go? Home. That's exactly right. That's where I'd want to go. I'd want to go back to my family. I would want to go back to that homestead, that place that I called home. I'd want to be there with my loved ones, my family. But not this guy. He saw an opportunity before him, and he said, "I'm going to take it." He was looking out for himself. He thought, if I can attach myself to the king, the next king, and I can prove to him that I killed his enemy. How amazing that would be. David's surely going to be excited about that. David's surely going to give me some type of reward. I'll probably be with David and part of his leading men because I have taken out his enemy. Verse 11. Therefore David took hold of his own clothes and tore them, and so did all the men who were with him. They mourned and wept. They fasted until evening for Saul and for Jonathan his son, for the people of the Lord and for the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. Now, if you were that Amalekite, and here you were, and you were delivering this news to David, and you thought in your mind the way things were going to go. You had it all played out in your head. This is what's going to happen. Have you ever done that? You had in your mind how something was going to happen. You've planned it out, and you've got an idea of what it's going to be like, and then when it actually happens, it doesn't play out the way you thought it would. Here was this guy, this Amalekite, and he had it all planned out in his head of how things were going to happen, and then we see that when he tells David that David did the unexpected, instead of David saying, "Good job, buddy, you did a great job. Thank you for taking care of my enemy. Thank you for bringing his crown and this bracelet to me. Thank you for doing that. Hey, let's have a big party. Let me award you. Let me give you some type of reward for doing this, for making it possible for me to be the next king, because you've removed my enemy." Instead of the Amalekite seeing David do that, he does the opposite. David and all of his men, they tear their clothes. They go into that mourning process, just like he had pretended to be in when he delivered the news. Wasn't the response that he expected. You ever been there? You ever delivered some news to somebody thinking they were going to receive it one way, and they received it a different way? Yeah, I see heads nodding all over this building. It happens, doesn't it? We got a creak in the floor right there. So here he had delivered the news, and the Amalekite didn't respond, or David did not respond the way that he thought he would. Look at verse 14 again, or verse 14. So David said to him, "How was it you were not afraid to put forth your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" I feel like this Amalekite standing there listening to David and hearing and watching all these men looking upon him, all of them mourning, weeping, crying, and then to see David ask him this question, how would you feel? How was it, verse 14 again, how was it you were not afraid to put forth your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? Look at verse 15. Then David called one of the young men and said, "Go near and execute him." And he struck him so that he died. So David said to him, "Your blood is on your own head, for your own mouth has testified against you, saying, I have killed the Lord's anointed." Today I want us to realize something. There are consequences to the actions in our life. There are consequences to the actions in our life. And I want you to realize something about this Amalekite. He did several things that led him down a really bad path. And that path led him to his own death. Let's think about the consequences of the Amalekite's actions. First of all, he stole Saul's crown and bracelet. He was a thief. He devised a plan which he thought would bring wealth and security to himself. He devised that in his head. He lied to David, saying that he was the one who had killed Saul. And although he probably found Saul already dead, it was in his heart to kill him. You take all those things and you think about this Amalekite, even making that decision in the first place to go to David was a wrong move. Because often we decide to do something without really considering what the outcome may be. Proverbs 6, verse 16 through 19, there's a list of things that the Bible says God hates. In Proverbs 6, 16 through 19, it says, "These 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are an abomination to him. A proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift in running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among the brethren." Let's think about that for a minute. Those things that it says that God himself hates. A proud look. This Amalekite, there was some pride within him to think that he could get away with all of this. He thought highly of himself to the point of thinking that I can take Saul's stuff, I can take it to David, and in his head he had himself built up to be something that he wasn't. So a proud look, a lying tongue. Obviously, he lied to David. So he was a liar. Hands that shed innocent blood. Although he may not have been the one, it was in his heart to do so if he had to. Because he said, "I did it." A heart that devises wicked plans. This whole scheme that he had worked up in his head from the moment he looked down and saw Saul there, he came up with that scheme, this wicked plan of what he was going to do. Feet that are swift in running to evil. Do you realize if you study out and you find out how far this Amalekite came from being in that Israelite camp to David was about a distance of 100 miles. And he got there pretty quickly, so I'm sure that he was swift in getting there. He was on his way thinking, man, the quicker I get there, the better life can be for me. So, feet that are swift in running to evil. A false witness. He gave a false witness of what had happened. He spoke lies. And one who sows discord among the brethren. Here was David and all of his men. And this Amalekite brought some discord there. It broke their hearts. They were groaning within themselves. They were mourning. There was some pain that was associated with that. Let me ask you this question. When is the last time that you acted prideful? When is the last time you acted prideful? Think about that. On a daily basis, we may act a little prideful and not even realize it. Yesterday, I had to go do the opening prayer for Union Power's annual meeting down at Wingate College. Well, of course, the meeting was around 10 o'clock. And y'all know what the weather was like yesterday morning, wasn't it? I had got dressed, had my suit, my tie on, fixed my hair. Being the son of a barber and a beautician, you know, I've always taken care of my hair. So I had it all fixed and, sprayed where it wouldn't move. Got in my car and I got up to Hilltop and I realized I was out of gas. So I had to stop and get gas. So I'm out pumping gas, not really thinking about the wind blowing. I got back in the car and I just happened to glance up in the mirror and I looked like a punk rocker. My hair was just... And I thought, oh my goodness. And my suit, even though I was under that, whatever you call that thing that you're under when you pump gas, rain was blowing. So I was wet. I got to Wingate College. I could not find a parking place. I had to walk through the rain with an umbrella. The umbrella did no good yesterday because the wind was making it go the opposite direction. I walked in, ran straight to the bathroom, and I was looking at myself, and I thought, you look awful. And then I remembered this message, and I thought, my goodness, that's prideful. Just push your hair down and go with it. Pride sometimes will pop up just like that. We don't even realize it. When's the last time you were prideful? When's the last time you lied about something? I don't know why this thought kept coming to my mind this week, but how many of you guys in here have had your wife come up to you? She's got on an outfit, and she says, "Does this make me look fat?" Don't talk to me. You know? Yeah.
Are you saying you lied?
No. Oh my goodness. There's a commercial. Y'all remember that commercial that was on TV a while back? Where the guy asked, or she came and asked him that question, and he just looked at the TV like he didn't hear anything. So, very smart man. When's the last time you took part in shedding innocent blood? You know, I look at that question and I've thought to myself, I've never killed anybody. But then Darren and Wave and myself, we went to the Crisis Pregnancy Center banquet a couple of weeks ago. And I heard testimony and I saw all these children that are aborted around the world. Precious little children. There was a lady that spoke to us that night that she was aborted, or the parents tried to abort her at almost full term by injecting a saline solution into the womb. It's supposed to burn the baby and kill the baby. And she would give birth to that baby within, I think, 24 hours or something like that. But the baby was born the next day alive at the abortion clinic. The doctor wasn't there because if the doctor had been there, the doctor apparently would have went ahead and killed the baby himself. And I think there's something in Congress right now about that very act, to legalize that or not. But there was a nurse that happened to be there that day, and she took that baby and ran it to the hospital, Caroline's Medical Center, and that little baby lived, and she spoke to us the other night. Amazing testimony. Amazing testimony. It's happening in the world every day. We may think, well, I'm not taking part in that. I've never aborted a child. I've never had someone in my family do that. But are you doing anything to prevent it from happening? You know, are you being a person that's supportive and getting involved? In January, we're going to look a lot closer at what we as a church can do. Because in January is that time where we celebrate or we think about sanctity of human life. And so we're going to think about partnering with the Crisis Pregnancy Center and what we can do as a church to help support and be there for them. When's the last time you devised a wicked plan? Some of you are having things go through your mind right now. Oh, I do remember I did this or that. I had this all planned out. Maybe you're doing it right now. Maybe you've got this plan of something you're going to do that's going to help better yourself or to help you escape from some trouble that you're in. When's the last time you ran toward evil? Or you didn't share the truth about what you've witnessed? Or brought discord to a group of people? What is the answer to all of this? What would have been the answer for that Amalekite that day? When he did all those things, when he did the things that God hates, what would have been the answer, the solution to that situation that he was in? When he was up there on Mount Gilboa looking down and he saw Saul there leaning upon the sword, the first thing he should have done is called on the Lord. But obviously, That wasn't in his mind. But it can be in our minds, especially if we are children of God, if we're one of God's children, and something comes into our life, or something is in our path, and we're looking upon it, we're trying to make a decision what we're going to do. We should call on the Lord. I want to close with this last verse. Luke 9:23. Here's the solution. Jesus said to them all, "If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself." Now, what if the Amalekite had denied himself that day and said, "Nope, not going to do that. That looks very enticing. That's, in my mind, I see this idea of how this could play out for my good." And we see things like that, don't we? We see opportunities and we think, wow, this could really be in my advantage if I just do this. But what if we deny ourselves, and then look what it says, take up his cross daily and then follow me. Jesus is saying this, whatever comes into our life, whatever's in our path, if we'll just take our eyes off of that for a moment and then look to Jesus and say, "Lord, what would you have me do?" And if you have an uneasy feeling about it after you've talked to the Lord, then maybe you don't do that. Maybe you seek God's will and you turn around and go the opposite direction. Taking up our cross means sometimes we have to do the difficult things. We have to stay with the weight because the cross was heavy. And there will be times in our life where we'll see an escape and we'll think, oh, this seems like an easy way out. So instead of going the easy way out, why don't we just take up our cross and continue following the Lord, because we know where that's going to lead. I watched last night, finally, God's Not Dead 2. How many of y'all have seen that movie? You need to watch it. You need to watch it. It's about this teacher. She was in class one day, and a student asked the question, who was the person they were discussing in class? Do you remember? I can't remember the person they were talking about in class. But anyway, this teacher took a stand. She quoted something in out of the Bible and Scripture, and some students talked about it. She ended up in court over it, separating church and state. And it became this big battle, but she stayed firm. She took up her cross. It might mean losing her job. It might mean losing her teaching certificate. It might mean that she never had a job opportunity again as a teacher. She took up her cross and she followed Jesus. She stayed true to Him. And in the end, she won the court case. Because God's not dead. So, can we do that? Can we see the cross of Christ as something that we need to pick up daily and follow Him? That means doing it the hard way sometimes. It means it might take a little longer. It means it might be a little heavier for you upon yourself than just taking the easy way out. Like the choir song said this morning, God says, I'm going to make it. That's all I need to know, folks. That's it. So if something comes before me that seems like an easy way out, I'm going to say, Lord, are you opening this door? Or is this Satan? Father, what would you have me do? He's going to answer. We've talked about this. He's going to answer in one of three ways. He's going to say yes, no, or wait. And whatever He says, do that. Would you bow your heads with me this morning?